Today I'm here with an award-winning Canadian journalist, Eman Bare, and when she is not dominating her job at the CBC, she is an ethical fashion designer who provides job opportunities for women around the world. Also, she will be dominating the law world soon enough. So, in my perspective, she's basically the equivalent to if Wakanda had a superwoman. We're going to start off by talking about where you grew up and your cultural roots, so your background, and yeah, you could just introduce yourself.
Okay, cool. So I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan. I have 3 brothers. I'm the second child, and I'm 25 years old. My whole life is like a 3-kilometer radius in Regina, Saskatchewan. My parents owned a business across the street from the house I grew up in. I went to school like half a block away, so I never really left like Albert Park. And then I don't know, I kind of just grew up and decided that I wanted to live in as many cities as possible and travel the world being a storyteller.
When did you realize you wanted to become a journalist?
You know, it was never really like a decision. It kind of just happened. My parents didn't speak English when I was growing up, so I used to watch the news with my dad and I'd translate. And like I would pretend that I was a news reporter, so I'd like listen to like the CBC in English and then translate for my dad in Somali. And I just thought it was so cool that that's somebody's job because it's just something that I had to do at home. And then with my dad, like owning a convenience store, I would go to work with him pretty much every morning. He was like my daycare before school. And he would always just be reading the paper and like drinking coffee. I always joke that I started drinking coffee when I was 7 years old because I would drink like the leftover of my dad's coffee basically. So I guess like just being like a third cultured kid, I've always been a storyteller because I've had to either explain things to my parents or kind of be like a bridge for my parents between like 2 different worlds. So it's not really anything I ever chose. It was just like the one thing that I grew up being and like the thing that made the most sense.
I noticed from time to time you post on your social media how people address you, and like I just want to know how you deal with these situations when they're not saying your title right or things like that.
So microaggressions, it's like I've dealt with them every single day, whether or not I'm a journalist or not a journalist. So I feel like as like a Black Muslim woman, it's kind of just become like an expectation of life. Like it's like they happen all the time. At work, it'll be like things with like people that I work with for like 8 months will refer to me as an intern, and I'm like, you don't think I'm gonna go back to school at some point? Like, how am I an intern still? Or they'll talk to, like I've been out on shoots while I'm training an intern, and the person that I'm there to interview will introduce themselves to the intern and assume I'm the intern, and I'm like, I'll let you see how far you think this interview is gonna get if I'm not the person asking questions. So how do I deal with it? I kind of like, I have to make it into a joke because otherwise I'd be very, very angry because like it happens all the time, and it's not even like people getting your title wrong because that can just be something that's like associated with being young, but it's like people legitimately insulting my intelligence. I had one communications director from a school board say he wanted to collectively educate me with my supervisor because I went to a public meeting without asking him first, which I had no reason to ask him. That's what a public meeting is. And so this went on for months. Like I just kept getting snarky emails from him regularly, and I was working on an investigative piece, so obviously he didn't like my line of questioning. So I just collected all of these emails and forwarded to the ministry that he works under. It's kind of like, you need to hold these people accountable. That's your job as a journalist, and people will do everything they can and use every insecurity that you might have or everything that they can hold against you as a way to like diminish like your voice, but you just need to realize that people can't win.
I know this is probably the longest title that most people would give you, or that maybe media itself would give a reporter like you, or like us, I guess. So what is it like being a Black Muslim hijabi woman in the media industry, and how do you deal with like barriers that come with it, or maybe stereotypes?
I mean, I think of it as normal because it's what I am, so it's like the most normal thing in the world. I think the problem is everybody else, because to everybody else, that's not the norm, and I think people need to ask themselves why it shocks them that I'm capable of doing what I'm like what I'm doing. Like there's this whole idea that like hijab is like some sort of a barrier, but it really isn't. It's everyone who creates barriers around hijab. So people who don't wear hijab, whether it be Muslim men or non-Muslim women, it's just people who have decided for you that your hijab has limitations on you. Like I grew up playing hockey and rugby and I wrestled, and there was never one point in my life where I was like, I'm a hijabi and I want to do this. I was just like Eman from Regina, Saskatchewan, who just did whatever because my parents, I don't know, wanted me to play every single sport. So it's not, it's just, I don't think about it because I think that like when you start othering yourself is kind of like when you start to lose you, like the center, you start to lose your voice, you know, like you start to lose your purpose.
What was the most difficult story or a major obstacle that you had when doing a story?
I think something, there's like a lot. One of the biggest ones though is like making people care, like making both your editors care and the people who are reading your stories care. Like I've done stories on like, I did one story where this family spent their life savings. So they were a Syrian refugee family. They spent their life savings getting their kids to Germany. Like they were in a Jordanian refugee camp. They were sending their kids to Germany on a boat. And as soon as their kids got to Germany, they ended up getting a call saying they were like being granted citizenship or refugee status in Canada, which is great, but they had no money to bring their kids home. So mom and dad and 2 younger siblings had to move to Canada, leaving 2 kids stranded in like a detention center in Germany. And I think that story got like 30 shares.
Oh, wow.
And like that's a story that like I had like actual footage of this kid on a boat, right? Like where he thought he was going to lose his life. Meanwhile, I'll do a story about like, I did one story where a cow had like 5 calves at once. And I got like 15,000 shares.
Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah, right? And you're like, people, like this is not the story.
It's like, yeah, it was like a real issue, but at the same time, that had more reads than...
It's just, it kind of like, it just sucks because you realize that people kind of don't care about people.
Yeah.
People can relate more to animals than they can to other human beings because they look different. And then I feel like it makes you incredibly, like almost like paranoid, you know? Like you go to Starbucks, grab a coffee, and you're kind of like, what would the people that I'm standing in line with right now think of me, or the stories that I tell, or, you know, like would they care? Does my life matter to them? I realized that one editor saying no does not mean my story is not worth telling. I'm very fortunate where I have like a pretty decent social media following. I can share something on my page that will sometimes get more shares than anything that I'll write for a media publication. So to me, it's kind of like if an editor says no, I'll just publish it my own way. And that's kind of why I started growing my social media presence, because I realized not everyone cares about the stories that I do, but that doesn't mean they're not important. The purpose of having your own platform is to share the stories that you care about.
From your perspective, what does success mean to you? And in other words, how can someone be successful in a career, in life, things like that?
I think success for me just means being proud of myself. And like that's not really tied to like any sort of accomplishments. It just usually means like you know when you walk away from a story and you know you did everything you could to like get that person to talk to you, and you're not upset over it because you tried your absolute hardest. Like I think to me like that's success. It's like I know that like I might not accomplish what I want with my career, but I know that I go to work every single day trying to do my absolute best and trying to tell the stories that I care about. I think success means in 40 years still being passionate about what I do every single day, because my biggest fear is hating my job. I never want to be that person.